The global political landscape is shifting, and some of America's former allies are becoming distant. Whether due to economic policies, military conflicts, or geopolitical rivalries, a growing number of nations are turning against the U.S. in 2025. So, which countries are pulling away, cutting ties, or even openly opposing the United States? Stay with us as we count down the 10 nations distancing themselves from America this year. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more engaging content. Let's get started. Number 10. Brazil. For decades, Brazil has had a complicated relationship with the United States, sometimes as a strategic partner, other times as a fierce critic. But in 2025, things have taken a turn for the worse. Under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's continued leadership, Brazil has doubled down on its ties with China and Russia, openly challenging U.S. influence in Latin America. Brazil's trade policies have increasingly favored BRICS nations, with the country now conducting more than 30% of its international trade in Chinese yuan instead of the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, Washington's sanctions on Brazil's key agricultural exports, particularly soybeans and beef, have only fueled resentment. The final straw. Brazil recently snubbed a U.S. military cooperation agreement, choosing instead to enhance defense ties with Moscow. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Brazil's arms imports from Russia increased by 45% in just 2 years. Public opinion in Brazil is also shifting. A 2025 Pew Research poll found that only 34% of Brazilians view the U.S. favorably, a steep decline from 52% in 2020. With growing anti-American sentiment and economic realignment, Brazil is making it clear it's carving its own path. Number 9. Saudi Arabia. Once considered one of Washington's closest Middle Eastern allies, Saudi Arabia has been steadily pulling away from U.S. influence. A major point of contention: oil. The Saudis have made it clear that they're tired of playing by America's economic rules and are instead strengthening their ties with China and Russia. In early 2025, Saudi Arabia announced that it would begin pricing a significant portion of its oil sales in Chinese yuan instead of U.S. dollars, a move that directly threatens the petrodollar system that has underpinned American financial dominance for decades. This comes after Saudi oil exports to China hit a record high of 2 million barrels per day, while exports to the U.S. dropped by 40% over the last 5 years. The U.S. has also found itself at odds with Riyadh over military concerns. The Biden administration's decision to freeze certain arms sales to Saudi Arabia in response to human rights violations did not sit well with the kingdom. In response, Saudi Arabia finalized a $15 billion defense deal with Russia, marking a significant shift in its geopolitical alliances. Meanwhile, Saudi leaders have been cozying up to BRICS, with the country officially joining the bloc in 2024. With all these moves, one thing is clear: Saudi Arabia is no longer waiting for Washington's approval. Number 8. Turkey. Turkey and the United States have had a love-hate relationship for years, but 2025 might be the breaking point. As a NATO member, Turkey was once a stronghold of Western influence in the Middle East. However, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's increasingly independent foreign policy, Turkey is playing its own game. One of the biggest blows to U.S.-Turkey relations was Ankara's decision to purchase additional Russian S-400 missile defense systems in early 2025, despite repeated warnings from Washington. The U.S. responded with more sanctions, further straining an already tense relationship. Beyond defense, Turkey has been strengthening its economic ties with China, with trade between the two nations surging past $50 billion annually. The country has also expressed interest in joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a security alliance led by Beijing and Moscow, further cementing its shift away from the West. Adding to the friction, anti-American sentiment in Turkey is rising. A 2025 survey from Metropol found that 68% of Turkish citizens believe the U.S. is a threat to national security. With economic and military realignment in full swing, Turkey is making it clear that its future may not involve Washington. Number 7. South Africa. South Africa's historical ties to the U.S. have always been lukewarm at best, but 2025 marks a definitive pivot toward new alliances. As a key BRICS member, South Africa has taken a strong stance against what it perceives as Western economic dominance, aligning itself more closely with China and Russia. In a major political move, the South African government refused to support U.S. sanctions on Russia, instead deepening its trade and military cooperation with Moscow. Bilateral trade between South Africa and Russia reached an all-time high in 2025, surpassing $3.5 billion. At the same time, Washington's attempts to pressure South Africa into supporting Western-backed policies on African affairs have only fueled tensions. Pretoria has openly criticized U.S. military involvement on the continent, arguing that it is a form of neocolonialism. Anti-American protests have also surged, with thousands marching in Cape Town and Johannesburg in opposition to U.S. foreign policies. According to a 2025 Ipsos poll, U.S. favorability in South Africa has plummeted to just 27%. The message is loud and clear. South Africa is charting its own course, and it no longer includes Washington. Number 6. Mexico. For decades, Mexico and the U.S. have had a complicated yet deeply interwoven relationship. However, in 2025, growing economic disputes, immigration tensions, and political disagreements have pushed Mexico to redefine its stance toward its northern neighbor. The biggest rift? Trade. Mexico has been rapidly diversifying its trade partnerships, reducing reliance on the U.S. in favor of stronger ties with China and Latin American economies. In 2025, China officially overtook the U.S. as Mexico's largest trading partner, with trade volumes exceeding $130 billion annually. Meanwhile, the U.S. has continued its aggressive stance on border security, implementing stricter policies that have strained diplomatic relations. Mexico's government has pushed back, with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador publicly condemning Washington's approach as hostile and unacceptable. On the security front, Mexico's decision to invite Russian and Chinese firms to assist in energy infrastructure projects, previously dominated by U.S. companies, has further fueled tensions. With these developments, it's becoming clear that Mexico is looking beyond the U.S. for its future economic and political partnerships. Number 5. India. For years, India and the U.S. have maintained a strategic partnership, largely driven by mutual concerns over China's rise. However, in 2025, cracks are beginning to show in this relationship as India seeks to assert its independence on the global stage. One of the biggest signs of this shift is India's increasing engagement with BRICS, where it has played a leading role in developing alternatives to Western financial institutions. In 2025, India expanded its trade agreements with Russia, ramping up oil imports despite U.S. sanctions. Bilateral trade between India and Russia hit an all-time high of $50 billion, raising eyebrows in Washington. Additionally, India has been at odds with the U.S. over arms deals. While the U.S. has pushed for India to reduce its reliance on Russian military hardware, India has instead deepened its defense ties with Moscow, signing a $7 billion deal for advanced fighter jets and missile systems. This defiance has led to growing tensions between New Delhi and Washington. On the tech front, India has resisted U.S. pressure to exclude Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei from its 5G network infrastructure. Instead, India has taken a pragmatic approach, allowing Huawei to continue operations while also developing its own technology sector. This move has angered Washington, which sees it as a security risk. Public sentiment in India is also shifting. A 2025 Pew Research poll found that only 42% of Indians view the U.S. favorably, a drop from 55% in 2020. With India pursuing a more independent foreign policy, its willingness to align with U.S. interests is increasingly in question. Number 4. Germany. Germany has long been a key U.S. ally in Europe, but in 2025, relations between Berlin and Washington are more strained than ever. One of the major reasons? Energy and economic policy. The fallout from Western sanctions on Russia has hit Germany particularly hard, as the country continues to struggle with high energy costs. Despite U.S. opposition, Germany has resumed limited energy imports from Russia, arguing that economic stability must come first. This decision has put Berlin on a collision course with Washington. Additionally, Germany has been critical of U.S. trade policies, which it sees as increasingly protectionist. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which provides subsidies to American-made goods, has been met with outrage in Berlin, with German officials accusing Washington of undermining European industries. On the military front, Germany has been pushing for greater European defense autonomy, reducing its reliance on NATO, which is largely funded by the U.S. in early 2025. Germany increased funding for the EU's independent defense initiatives, signaling a shift away from US-dominated security structures. Public sentiment has followed suit. A 2025 YouGov poll found that 60% of Germans believe the US exerts too much influence over European affairs, with many supporting a more independent EU foreign policy. As Germany prioritizes its own economic and security interests, its alignment with Washington is weakening. Number 3. Iran. It should come as no surprise that Iran remains one of the most vocal critics of the United States. However, in 2025, tensions between Tehran and Washington have escalated to new heights. One of the biggest points of contention is Iran's growing military cooperation with Russia and China. In 2025, Iran finalized a $10 billion arms deal with Moscow, securing advanced fighter jets and missile defense systems. This move has intensified concerns in Washington about Iran's regional influence. Additionally, Iran has deepened its ties with China, signing a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement that includes major investments in Iranian infrastructure and oil production. With China now accounting for nearly 40% of Iran's oil exports, Tehran is less dependent on Western markets. The nuclear issue remains a flashpoint. In 2025, negotiations over Iran's nuclear program collapsed entirely, with Tehran openly rejecting U.S. demands for restrictions. In response, Washington imposed new sanctions, but Iran has continued expanding its nuclear capabilities, drawing concerns from global security analysts. Anti-American sentiment in Iran is at an all-time high, with government-backed protests frequently denouncing U.S. policies. According to a 2025 Gallup poll, over 85% of Iranians view the U.S. as a hostile power. As Iran strengthens its partnerships with Russia and China, its opposition to Washington remains unwavering. Number 2. Russia. Russia's rivalry with the United States has only intensified in 2025. Since the invasion of Ukraine, relations between Moscow and Washington have deteriorated to Cold War levels, with Russia positioning itself as a direct challenger to U.S. global influence. Economically, Russia has adapted to Western sanctions by deepening trade relations with China, India, and other BRICS nations. In 2025, Russia and China launched a new financial system designed to bypass the U.S.-controlled SWIFT banking network, further reducing reliance on the dollar. This has significantly undermined Washington's economic leverage. Militarily, Russia continues to expand its global presence. Moscow has strengthened its military alliances with countries like Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela, supplying them with advanced weapons and defense technology. U.S. intelligence reports indicate that Russian military bases are expanding in Africa and Latin America, raising concerns in Washington. Public sentiment in Russia is overwhelmingly anti-American, with state media portraying the U.S. as the chief architect of global instability. A 2025 Levada Center poll found that 90% of Russians believe the U.S. is trying to weaken their country.
With Moscow actively working to counter U.S. influence in every corner of the world,
Russia remains one of Washington's biggest adversaries. Number 1. China. If there's one country leading the charge against U.S. influence, it's China. The rivalry between Beijing and Washington has reached an all-time high in 2025, with tensions escalating on multiple fronts. Economically, China is actively working to dethrone the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. The yuan has overtaken the dollar in several global trade agreements, with major economies like Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Russia now conducting transactions in Chinese currency. In 2025, China launched a digital yuan initiative that has further accelerated the shift away from the dollar. Militarily, China has expanded its presence in the South China Sea, constructing new military bases and increasing naval patrols. Tensions over Taiwan have reached a boiling point, with Beijing warning Washington against further arms sales to the island. The U.S. has responded with increased military deployments in the Pacific, raising the risk of direct confrontation. Technologically, China is surpassing the U.S. in key industries, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and 6G telecommunications. Despite U.S. sanctions on Chinese tech firms, companies like Huawei and Alibaba continue to thrive, expanding their influence across global markets. Public sentiment in China is increasingly nationalistic, with state propaganda emphasizing the need to counter U.S. influence. A 2025 Global Times poll found that 88% of Chinese citizens believe the U.S. is actively trying to sabotage China's rise. With its economic, military, and technological dominance growing, China is not just turning against the US, it's positioning itself as the world's next superpower. Here are 5 practical tips to consider when visiting countries that dislike Americans. Learn local customs and etiquette. Understanding cultural norms, greetings, and behaviors can help you avoid offending locals and improve your interactions. Avoid political discussions. Many countries have strong opinions about US policies, so steering clear of political debates can prevent unwanted tensions. Blend in and be respectful. Dressing modestly, avoiding loud behavior, and respecting local traditions can help you avoid standing out as an unwelcome tourist. Be cautious about safety and scams. In places with anti-American sentiment, staying alert in public spaces and avoiding confrontational situations is essential for safety. Rely on local hospitality and open-mindedness. While general attitudes may seem unfriendly, treating people with kindness and showing interest in their culture can lead to positive experiences. The global landscape is changing, and America's dominance is facing significant challenges. As these countries continue to distance themselves from Washington, the balance of power is shifting in ways that could redefine international politics for years to come. But what about the next big geopolitical realignment? Could we see new alliances emerge that reshape the global order entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore our channel for more insights.